That's Mr. Burns from The Simpsons.
Oh, yeah.
Ah, the human brain. Simpson, eh? I do a pretty good Mr. Burns, I have to say. All right. We're on page 698. That's where we last left off. Probably the most important day of this chapter is today. They love to ask about how a nerve signal moves down a neuron and how one neuron communicates with another. And we're talking about both of those today. That's 37.2. Okay? Are y'all ready? Are y'all excited? It's exciting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so how does a neuron, a nerve cell, hey, there's a naked guy again. You notice I keep going to that picture? Why is that? Here is a nerve cell. That's creepy. Here's a nerve cell. It's also called a neuron. Neurons have dendrites on the outside. They have the cell body there, and they have a long axon that's like a cable that sends an impulse from one cell to another, to somewhere else. Maybe to some muscles, or maybe to another nerve cell. So, we're going to learn how that works here. And it all involves charged particles, what we call ions. Do y'all remember from chemistry what an ion is?
Negatively charged.
The charged atom. Remember that? And so there are ions inside the axon. This is the axon right here up close. The axon that's leaving the nerve cell. And remember, this axon can be very long. You have axons running all the way from your spinal cord to your toes that are, several feet long. So this is showing like the axon is shaped like a tube, you see. And it's kind of hollow inside, and it's got ions inside of it and outside of it. Question?
Since the nerve cells are so long, does that mean there's fewer neurons than other cells in the body?
No, not necessarily, because you got a lot of them packed. Like in your brain, you have 100 billion of them. So there's a lot of them.
Wow, that's a lot.
But their extensions are long. Their wiring is long. So
what do they do?
they send signals around the body.
So the ions inside and outside send signals.
Yeah, that's the one. No, the neuron sends a signal. I'm going to show you what the ions do here. So inside the neuron, you have ions, and the main ions we're going to worry about here are called sodium, which is a positive charged ion, and potassium, which is a positively charged ion. There are also some negatively charged particles that we're not really going to talk about in particular. But the negatively charged particles are there too. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip these slides and I'm going to come back to them. I want to show you.
When you say neuron, you said neuron earlier. Is that the same thing as axon?
Neuron is a nerve cell. An axon is part of a neuron. An axon is the long extension that goes away from the cell body. It's part of a neuron.
So does a neuron, just like any other your cell, with all the organelles and all those?
Hold on, let me back this up. Whoops, naked man again. Right here, EKF. This is a neuron. This whole thing.
Oh, the whole thing is.
This is the axon. This extension here.
Okay, that's what I
Got it? Okay, so let me go to this, and let's watch this video, and I'll explain it using this video, and then I'll go back and show you stuff. Why are we not getting nothing here?
Double click. Nope.
Did I hit disable?
Or you might have.
Well, let's end the whole show. And let's try it again. I'm not saving that. No? Now that won't work.
You're clicking and dragging, I think.
Enable content. Maybe that's what
Like, what would you want it to say in content like that?
Hey, there's Naked Man. Here we go. Finally. Okay, well, let's watch this video and then I'll talk about it.
How does an action potential occur? When a neuron is not transmitting a signal, there is a separation of charge across its membrane. This is called the resting potential. Sodium is in high concentration outside, and potassium is in high concentration inside the cell.
Sarah, watch the video.
The cytoplasm is negative relative to the exterior because of the presence of negatively charged proteins, amino acids, and other substances. When a sufficiently large stimulus reaches a section of membrane, sodium is able to diffuse in across the membrane following its concentration gradient. This depolarizes the membrane and is the stimulus for similar changes in adjacent membrane. Thus, the action potential travels down the axon in a chain reaction. After sodium diffuses in, potassium diffuses out following its own concentration gradient. This restores the membrane's polarity, but sodium and potassium have switched positions. The sodium-potassium pump restores these ions to their original positions, and the neuron is now ready for another action potential.
So,
Okay.
an action potential is just sending in a signal.
How does an action potential occur? When a neuron is not...
Okay. Now let me go over it much slower
What is this called?
and describe each part to you.
There was a
This is how a nerve sends a signal. A nerve cell. This is a nerve cell, a neuron. Okay? Here is the cell body. What are these called?
dendrites.
Dendrites. They receive signals. And this is the long axon that sends the signal along. Y'all have to watch this. I don't think writing it does you much good right now. Watch it and understand it, and you can write a whole novel about it later. Check this out. These little cells right here, they're called Schwann cells. And they have myelin that insulates the signal as it moves along. Now, if we look close up, there are spaces between the Schwann cells, right there, where there's no myelin. And it's in those spaces where we see the impulse, we see how the impulse gets pushed along. And so we're going to do a close-up of one of these spaces. You know what it's called, that space? Anyone who knows a whole lot about biology?
Chief. No, not chief.
It's called a node of Ranvier.
A what?
A node of Ranvier.
Sounds
Named
like
after the guy who just
Sounds
described
like
it.
a movie.
It's a little space in between the two Schwann cells. So anyway, we look up close at the node of Ranvier, and we see that there's potassium ions inside the axon, and there's sodium ions outside the axon. Now, both potassium and sodium are positively charged. But as you can see, they've put plus signs on the outside and minus signs on the inside. And the reason why they've done that is because there's also some negatively charged ions on the inside of the axon that they're not talking about here. They're mostly proteins and such that are charged negative that don't have any motion to them, so they aren't going to put it in our video because they only want to show the things that are moving in this video.
Which one's on the inside?
There are negatively charged proteins on the inside, as well as potassium. That's the K. There's little K's there. I don't know if you can read them very well. And there's sodiums on the outside.
What do you call it? Node of what?
Node of Ranvier.
Okay.
I already got it.
Now, what happens is when a signal comes along, let me forward to a signal coming along here. This signal is called an action potential, and this is the green area here.
Is this the rest potential when it's just normal?
Well, the resting resting state is what you're seeing now. This is what all your neurons are right now when they're not firing signals.
Minor firing.
They're just sitting there at this resting state. Now, a signal comes along, an electrical signal, and this is it. And what happens, and we call it an action potential. And when this action potential comes along, it causes little gates, little proteins that are in the membrane here, open up. Do you remember how there are membrane proteins that can open and close and act like little doorways? Well, those things open up in the membrane, and the first ones to open, and they aren't showing them here, so you have to imagine them, but imagine right there, there's a little sodium channel that opens up and allows the sodium to come in. And the sodium will come right in by diffusion, because there's a lot of sodiums on this side of the membrane, and there's not many on this side of the membrane. So as soon as those sodium channels open up, the sodiums will come in. Are y'all with me here? You dropped
I
your
got it.
pencil, you were so astounded.
What is potassium goes?
No, we aren't getting to the potassium yet. Let's do the sodium first.
Where does that electrical impulse come from? What is it?
It comes from earlier on the axon, which I'll show you in a minute where it originally comes from. Okay? So you get a little ahead, but that's okay. But check this out. So the sodium rushes in. Do you see the sodiums coming in? Whoop. Did y'all miss it? Watch it again. Sodiums come in. See the sodiums coming in? Now it's positive on the inside briefly, because the sodiums were positively charged, and they overwhelm any negative charges that were on the inside. So the inside becomes positively charged. Now they write negative on the outside, but that's not really correct. The outside didn't suddenly turn negative, but they're just showing you that it's a lot more positive on the inside than it is on the outside. So they show you that by putting a negative here. It's not really negative. But we're not worried about the outside, we're worried about the inside. The inside of the axon is now positively charged for a brief second. It's actually a split second. It's a tenth of a second or something like that.
Are those potassiums?
The potassiums are still on the inside.
So are those
And the sodiums are now on the inside as well.
are those positive charges like just pushing a negative charge throughout the entire thing?
It started out negative, and after the sodiums come in, now it's positive.
Okay.
That's all you have to know for now. Now, there are more sodium channels located in the membrane further down. And those sodium channels are sensitive to that positive charge there. Are you getting this, Elena? So when those sodium channels here that you can't see feel the positive charge there, they're going to open up. And what's going to happen when they open up? Can you guess?
Sodium comes in.
Sodium's going to rush in. And so it's like a domino effect. Back when I was a kid, we played dominoes. You set up a bunch of dominoes, and then you hit one, and it hits the next one, and it goes all the way down. And that's how we had fun. Then video games came, and no one played dominoes anymore. Now you get the domino game on Xbox and set them up there. Anyway, the next channels open up, and watch. Those sodiums move in there, and the next channels open up, and sodiums move in there. And so if you kind of blur your eyes and look at it, because it goes real fast, it's like the signal is moving from left to right. You see what I'm saying? Sodiums rush in here, then the next sodiums rush in, then the next sodiums rush in.
Why do they rush in if it's back?
They rush in because the little channels open in the membrane. So right here, right now, it's not showing it, but pretend there's a protein right there that will let sodium through. When that protein opens, this sodium's going to go in. And it goes in by diffusion, because there's a lot of sodiums out here and not many sodiums in here, so sodium's going to come inside.
So then how do they switch back?
The reason why the channel opens is because the channel is sensitive to this positive charge here. When this sodium protein senses that positive charge, it will open,
Why do those?
and the sodiums will come in.
did those open in the first place?
They are sensitive to ones before it, so it started out further back. I'm going to get to where the original stimulus is later. Can you wait that long? Thank you.
Is this little thing that we're seeing happening only in the node of ring?
Yes. Yes, it only does this in the node of Ranvier.
I thought it does the whole thing, but you only did.
No, it only does it in the node of Ranvier.
Yeah,
Where the myelin is covering it, it doesn't do it. And so it somehow looks like the signal's jumping from one node to another. It goes pop, 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 pop. So I'm not done yet. Can we continue here? So the sodiums rush in. Now after the sodiums rush in, the potassium ions that are on the inside are going to rush out and restore the positive charge on the outside of the membrane. So watch as I move this along. I move it along to the next one. Watch over here, the potassiums right here are about to come out. See, the potassiums came out over here? And that restored the positive charge on the outside. Because potassium is positively charged just like sodium. So what happened was sodiums rushed in due to the membrane proteins opening. And then some other proteins opened that let potassium out. And so right in this area, we're back to being negatively charged on the inside. And the charge has basically then moved down the axon. This positive charge is continuing on. That's inside the axon. If you notice, the positive charge moves from left to right. But none of the particles do. The particles only go up and down. The particles only come in and out, but it's the impulse that moves down the axon. It looks like it's a positive charge on the inside of the axon that just keeps moving.
What is it called when they switch? Like when now all the sodium's on the inside and all the potassium's on the outside?
Well, now the sodiums are all on the inside and the potassiums are all on the outside. So this is the opposite state of what we started
The
at.
opposite rest.
Yeah, it doesn't have a name. Do you want to give it a name? Call it Willis.
Why did the potassiums go out?
The potassiums go out
To restore?
because after the signal comes through, there are little membrane proteins there that they aren't showing that let potassiums through. And they open up because they're sensitive to that positive charge as well. So what happens is the sodium channels open and the sodiums rush in. And then briefly a second later, the potassium channels open and that lets the potassiums out.
Isn't the whole wave called like a synapse?
The whole wave is called an action potential.
Is there's the reason they go out is because they're sensitive to the positive change?
The reason why the potassiums go out is because the proteins that are in the membrane are sensitive to this positive charge, and they will open and let the potassiums out. And the next sodiums down are sensitive to that positive charge, and they open and they let these sodiums in. And then the potassiums will quickly go out after them.
So as this happens, do we like feel stuff?
This is how a nerve signal moves through an axon.
So it's like your leg.
So
is
if you touch my finger, just touch my finger. Oh, I felt her touch my finger. Well, that's because a signal went to my spinal cord, then to my brain, and I felt it. That's how you feel something.
Okay. Pull my finger.
Yeah, any signal.
I'm good.
When you feel anything, when you hear my voice, it's because neurons in your ear are sending a signal to your brain
Sorry.
saying, I'm hearing his voice.
So do you hear faster than you feel?
So it all moves at about the same
So,
speed.
can multiple impulses go through the same channel? Like the same, whatchamacallit? That
No, only
stream.
one impulse can go through this axon.
So what if you...
Can we wait 2 days to talk about that? We're going to talk about that in 2 days. Nerves and what a nerve is. It's a collection of a bunch of these neurons.
Or what if you felt like different sensations in the same nerve?
Then you have many neurons make up
So
a
that's
nerve.
impossible.
So is this a nerve?
Because there's too many. Is that it?
Some neurons feed
Okay.
a sense of pain, some neurons feed a sense of cold, so you touch something cold, you're getting multiple signals from that, pain and cold.
The node.
So if it was like a frozen squid or something, I mean, I know that's not a bad example, or like a frozen jellyfish, like if it was cold and its tongue.
That's right, because you have pain sensors and you have cold sensors. You have pain neurons and cold neurons. I'm not done yet. So now the signal has gone through. Are y'all with me? Y'all have a question?
I don't know what a nerve cell is.
Joke.
This is an axon. It's part of a nerve cell. A nerve cell in the wrong side. Whoops, not naked now. That's a nerve cell.
Where is that?
They're all over the place. They're in your brain, spinal. Let's go to the naked man and look.
This?
There are nerve cells
Yeah,
that make up
absolutely.
the brain and spinal cord here. There are nerve cells in all these golden parts that make up these nerves. One of these nerves might have 10,000 nerve cells in it.
He's got a lot of nerve.
It's funny. You got a lot of nerve.
Really funny.
Better than mine.
So when you say that axons can go from your foot to your spinal cord, would that be one neuron's axon?
One neuron's axon, and you might have 100,000 neurons all going through a nerve.
But one axon of one neuron can be.
Yes, one axon of one neuron can be 3
But
feet
do you
long,
have-
or 10 feet long
What's the
if you're a
difference
giraffe.
between the axon and the neuron?
Axon is
Wait,
part of the neuron.
This is the axon, that's
Nerve cell is another name for
and then
neuron,
this is the axon. The neuron is the whole thing, including the where those little things are, the cell body, all that.
Up, naked man.
Small, Stephanie.
Nerve cell.
Here, look up here. Look up here. This whole thing is a neuron, also called a
What?
nerve cell. It consists of dendrites, a
Sarah.
cell body, and an axon. This is the axon. We're looking up close at the axon when we do this
What are
video.
those things at the end?
Here,
Yeah.
those are axon terminals. That's where the signal ends and passes the signal along, which we're going to get to next,
Okay.
if we get to it.
Is that the muscle?
That's a muscle right there, but sometimes the signal's passed
Right.
on to a nerve and not a muscle.
What are dendrites?
Dendrites are receivers of signals.
I thought dendrites were those cells that eat things.
Axon like turn into a dendrite into another?
No.
That's a dendrite
Axons
cell.
send signals away from
Right.
the cell body. Dendrites receive signals from others.
Wait, what about dendrites? Those cells that like eat things. Dendritic.
What
Never mind.
happens to the
It's too close.
signal once it hits the nerve?
We're gonna get to that if we can get to it. Okay? This is all stuff you missed from yesterday. So if you can look over the video we did yesterday, that would help you. Okay. Oh, I could have just been using this. So there's a neuron, a nerve cell,
It's like sausage.
right? And watch, Hannah, we're getting close to the axon. Watch. See?
The node.
This whole thing is the axon.
And then
And we're going to look up close at it. And it's got ions inside of it. Do you know what kinds of ions we have?
Sodium and potassium.
Sodium and potassium. And some negatively charged stuff we won't worry about. An action potential comes along.
And sodium.
Sodium rushes in. That activates the next channels. And sodium rushes in there. That activates the next channels. Sodium rushes in there. And the positive charge moves along.
And then so just the sodium stays in there, potassium stays in.
After the sodium comes in, the potassium comes right out. And now sodium and potassium have switched places. Before we can send another signal along, we got to switch the sodium and potassium back. There is yet another channel in the membrane here. It's called the sodium-potassium pump. And that switches all the sodium and potassium back.
Haven't we learned about that before?
Yeah.
We did. We studied that in chapter 2, I think.
I don't know.
Sodium-potassium pump switches the sodium. Look at it switching back. And so we're ready to go again. So that's how a nerve signal moves down an axon. Highly important stuff.
What do you said the sodium potassium pump switches it. Where is that?
It's also in the membrane here. They're not showing it. It's a protein that's in the membrane. Remember those membrane proteins?
So where's the neuron? Is the whole cell?
Yes. Here's a neuron.
That whole thing.
The whole thing. It's also called a nerve cell.
What is the ball?
That's the cell body. Guess what these are?
Dendrites.
Dendrites. They receive signals. This is an axon. It sends the signal along.
And those are dendrites at the end?
Nope. That's part of the axon too. It can branch off.
And that connects to the dendrites of
And
another
that
cell?
connects to the dendrites of a different neuron.
Okay.
So how many neurons are there in total?
In your whole body?
Yeah.
Over 11 billion, right?
Maybe a trillion. 100 billion in your brain.
Really?
Never mind.
And then there are others outside.
Slightly off.
So the sodium potassium pump switches them after the impulse is passed?
That's correct.
A nerve impulse is an electrical current that travels along dendrites or axons due to ions moving through voltage-gated channels in the neuron's plasma membrane. Voltage-gated channels open and close in response to an electrical voltage, so they are affected by changes in electrical charge around them. When a neuron is at rest, a charge difference is maintained between the inside and outside of the cell.
This is moving a little slow. See, this is showing the little gates. There's the sodium channels. So here comes the signal. Sodium channels open. Sodium rushes in. And now it's positive on the inside.
But the potassium is still in there.
Potassium's still in. After the sodium rushes in, the potassium rushes out. See, the potassium channel is the green one?
Gated potassium channels open.
Now, the
This allows a
potassium's gonna
rapid
open.
flow of potassium ions out of the cell.
The potassium leaves, and that restores the charge on the outside. And now they've switched places.
On the inside?
Yeah, that restores the negative charge on the inside
So-
and the positive charge on the outside.
How does
And so it just keeps moving to the right.
that axon gain potassium back? How does the potassium get
How's the
back?
potassium get back?
The pump switches.
The sodium potassium pump,
Oh, which is also on there. Okay.
which is also here. Here's the sodium potassium pump at work, switching them back.
Active transport mechanism. 3 sodium ions bind to the protein channel, and an ATP provides the energy to change the shape of the channel that in turn drives the ions through the channel. One phosphate group from the ATP remains bound with the channel. The sodium ions are released on the other side of the membrane outside of the cell, and the new shape of the channel has a high affinity for potassium ions, and 2 of these ions now bind to the channel. This binding again causes a change in the shape of the protein channel, and this conformational change releases the phosphate group on the cytoplasm side. This release allows the channel to revert to its original shape, and as a result, the potassium ions are released inside the cell. In its original shape, the channel has a high affinity for sodium ions, and when these ions bind again, they initiate another cycle.
Y'all got it?
What is the thing, like, what's the thing at the end? Like, where is it going?
Okay, so this is outside the axon, and and this is inside the axon.
Like in the diagram, it has the dendrite.
She's talking about the other end of the axon that looks like the dendrite.
It's like the dendrite, and then there's the axon.
Okay, that's what we got to get to next.
That looks like I have a question before we go.
Yeah?
The outside of the axon,
Yeah?
is that plasma in your cells? Or like what is that?
The outside of the axon?
Outside of
Yeah, what surrounds that cell?
A bunch of sodium.
But
A
like,
bunch of sodium ions floating around.
is that like in your body?
Yeah.
Like just like fluid, like the interstitial
Yeah,
fluid?
it's in the fluids. It's what we call interstitial fluid. Fluids between the cells. Is that what you said? Good.
I'm confused about the channels because like it showed 2 channels before and now it's showing 1. Like the last video showed 2.
The one it's just showing here is the sodium potassium pump.
Oh, that's what I completely.
There's other ones in the membrane too, but it's not showing.
And that's the end switch back to normal.
This is the one that switches them back. Okay, so let's go see where that signal came from to begin with. Isn't that what you're waiting on, Hannah? I'm going to go through all this and show you the video. At the end of the axon is what's called a synapse. And that's what sends the signal on. So watch this signal come down. This is that electrical signal, that positive charge that's inside the axon. They have it lit up here, but it's actually not glowing in real life.
When a nerve impulse fires down an axon, it eventually reaches a synapse, the narrow gap between 2 neurons. Here, the action potential triggers the release of special chemicals that quickly diffuse across the synapse. These chemicals, called neurotransmitters, bind to protein receptors on the adjacent neuron. This opens channels which trigger a new action potential. In this way, the body transmits impulses between the many cells of our nervous system.
So we call this whole thing a synapse. A synapse is where 2 neurons join one another. So this is the end of one axon, and that's the dendrite of a different one. And the signal gets sent along. It's sent along chemically. I'm going to talk more about it tomorrow. Read 37.2 tonight. And now, Stephanie, you are allowed to leave. Say what?